that with large language models right now, we are between Volta and Maxwell. Humanity was extremely scared by electricity. And the interesting piece is this. In 1930, finally, 80% of the factories were using electricity. Two and a half years ago, I attended a conference where among the speakers there was Professor Tomaso Poggio, who is a faculty member at MIT. And during the conference, during his presentation, he said that with large language models right now, we are between Volta and Maxwell. We do not understand why, as we increase the size of a model, it shows behaviors that really look like human intelligence, and the scaling, the reason of them working while you scale them is not fully understood. So the story of the invention of electricity, for me, was very interesting. And so after attending this conference, I ended up into a rabbit hole, and I'm gonna bring you together with me through this rabbit hole because I did some further research on this topic, and I find this very enlightening. And so follow me, please, with the white rabbit, and I think it will be interesting. So Professor Poggio said we are between Volta and Maxwell. So what's the story of the invention of electricity? So Volta in 1799 was able to build the first chemical battery, demonstrating that you can generate electricity out of chemicals. And before, humanity didn't know that. We thought that electricity was something to do with life, with animal life. And instead, it demonstrated that you can generate it with chemicals. But the more important point here is that it was able finally to generate reliably electricity. And that led to a bunch of other inventions afterwards, because it was the reliability of the production of electricity was critical in its invention. Then after Volta, there are a bunch of other well-known folks that you probably remember, like Ampere and Ohm, and we invented a bunch of other, figured a bunch of other things out. But they were able to generate electricity, and this was the point of Professor Poggio, for decades, without fully understanding the nature of electricity. Until we got Maxwell, 1865, 65 years later. So for 65 years, we used electricity. We were able to build it and generate it reliably, but we were not able to comprehend the nature of electricity, and particularly its interconnection with magnetism, until Maxwell really explained it. And so with large language model, that's where we stand. And that I found that very interesting. So this is the invention journey of electricity. But then I thought, okay, let me now understand the adoption journey. When humanity started using electricity, and what has been the challenges that we faced in adopting this radically new technology. And so here you see plotted Volta at the beginning of the 19th century. Then we got Maxwell 65 years later, and then the adoption. Okay, I want to bring you at the end here of this slide, where you see, so Volta was able to generate electricity reliably, but 100 years afterwards, in 1900, only 5% of American factories were using electricity and were moved out of steam into electricity. So in 100 years, the adoption was close to zero. So we built it, we invented it, we used it, the adoption was not there. And the interesting piece is this. In 1930, finally, 80% of the factories, this is the US data, but if you look at the European data, it's similar, 80% of the factories were using electricity. So over those 30 years, the switch really happened. Steam was retired, and the adoption of electricity happened. What's very also insightful is that the productivity gain that the world saw in the 20s, the well-known roaring 20s, we call them the roaring 20s because there was a major wealth creation due to a major productivity gain, was the direct consequence of finally after more than 100 years, the adoption of electricity in factories and the retirement of steam as a source of power. And so the impact was amazing. The technology was amazing. It still took 120 years to adopt it. Now, what's interesting is what happened in between. So after the 65 years of scientists, the scientists went away and the engineers came in, and there are the Edison, the Tesla, who started inventing products associated to electricity. There is a very well-known bulb, but more importantly, there is the electric breaker, for example, because we needed a way to not only use electricity, but also use it safely, because electricity can kill you. And the meter, because you need to measure how much you're spending with electricity if you want to use it into a factory floor. All those technologies were invented towards the last 2 decades of the 19th century. There were a few other interesting and insightful side stories related to this, the invention and adoption of electricity that I believe are interesting to share here. One is that in the last 20 years of the 19th century, so when the bulb came in, the electric breaker came in, humanity was extremely scared by electricity. Okay, this is something I didn't know. So there was this lineman who was killed while he was doing maintenance in New York City. Was the dead body has been there hanging for hours in Madison Square, and this event got major press coverage across the globe and scared off people even more than what they were scared. So electricity was perceived as something very dangerous, to the point that President Harrison, so they brought electricity to the White House because it was a great technology. They didn't want to use candlelight, so the White House got wired quite early. But President Harrison, who ran the US for at the end of the century, refused to turn on and off the light and asked his staff, and I read that also the First Lady was doing the same. They were asking their staff to turn on and off the light because it was perceived as something very risky for the American president to do. So this to me looks very, very similar to all the press coverage that we see every day, how AI is risky, how we should be afraid of AI, AI is going to conquer the world, we're going to become slaves of AI, and all of that. To me, looks very, very similar. I believe probably in a few decades we're going to be laughing about all this stuff. The other very mind-boggling story related to the adoption of electricity was this, what historians call this productivity paradox. So in the 19th centuries, we were using steam power. Steam power was much, much worse than electricity. It's not just a different source of power. You had to build a factory around the shafts. You had these huge shafts, and everything had to be built around the shafts. No flexibility at all. On the other hand, electricity is a million times better. You can have power tools, so you plug them in, you can build the factory as you want. So if you imagine, okay, I own a factory, what should I use? The answer is clear to us right now, but at the time it was not. So electricity was available, was invented, and still at the beginning of the 20th century, so last century, the adoption was 5%. So it took an extremely long time before people running factories decided to really change and make this change, because they had to redesign entirely the way they were working. They were familiar with the technology. They didn't want to change. So this just gives you, I believe, for me it was very insightful because it gives an idea of how much this organizational inertia is slowing things down. And I believe with AI it's going to be exactly the same. And I see this happening. 2.5, 3 years ago, we got ChatGPT. We thought, okay, we're going to change large companies overnight. They're going to fire a zillion people. This is not happening.